Once the ceremonies were completed, it was time for Adaugo to greet the guests. But when they came to call her, there was a huge problem. Adaugo was nowhere to be found. Once upon a time, in a far-off, enchanting part of the East, there was a lovely little village named Agba. This village was not just any ordinary place. It was a delightful slice of paradise that seemed to capture the hearts of everyone who visited. The sun would shine brightly down upon Agba, lighting up the village in a warm golden glow that made everything look magical. The villagers of Agba were known far and wide for their joyful spirits and boundless energy. Every morning, they would greet each other with big smiles and words of encouragement, making everyone feel loved and welcome. They were a community of hard-working folks, dedicated to their lands and to each other, creating a wonderful environment where everyone helped out. In Agba, the soil was incredibly fertile, almost like it had been blessed by nature itself. The villagers, who were excellent farmers, took great pride in cultivating a variety of crops. They grew cassava, which they turned into delicious dishes that were enjoyed at village feasts. Yams were another staple, big and hearty, which they often shared with their neighbors. The vegetables they grew were like bursts of color on their plates, bright greens, reds and yellows, all fresh and bursting with flavor. Throughout the year, the fields of Agba were a sight to behold. They were a patchwork quilt of greens and browns, stretching as far as the eye could see, dotted with the hard-working villagers tending to the crops. The children of the village would often run alongside the fields, playing and laughing, while their parents worked the land, all under the watchful eye of the gentle sun. In the heart of this tranquil and beautiful village lived an extraordinary stunning young maiden named Adaugo. She was truly a vision of loveliness, admired from far and near. From her head to her toes, she was perfection. Adaugo's body was graciously shaped, and her long, luscious hair was intricately braided into stunning knots that cascaded down her back like a waterfall of black silk. Her skin was as smooth and radiant as the finest silk, glowing warmly in the sunlight. Her beauty was so renowned that tales of her charm spread to several villages far away, making her a legend in her own time. Adaugo was the cherished daughter of Mazi Ojeli and his wife, Oyibo. Mazi Ojeli was a simple man, not blessed with wealth or riches. However, the extraordinary beauty of his daughter brought him a different kind of fortune. It made him quite popular among the villagers. Everyone knew him, and many sought his friendship, perhaps dreaming of one day winning the heart of his lovely daughter. This popularity brought him many favors and much goodwill, filling his days with happiness. In Adaugo's peaceful village, she was a center of attention for many of the young men. They came from far and near, each hoping to win her heart and make her his bride. They brought all sorts of gifts, trying to impress her and show their affection. There were fine clothes, soft and colorful, that shimmered in the sunlight. They brought jewelry that sparkled like the stars in the night sky, and hearty cuts of meat from the best hunts, along with many other wonderful presents. Despite all these tempting offerings, Adugo remained gracious but firm in her responses. Each time a suitor came to her with hope in his eyes, she would politely turn him away, telling them gently that she wasn't ready to marry. She didn't want to hurt anyone's feelings. But the young men of the village and beyond were persistent. They admired not just Adugo's stunning appearance, but also her serene and respectful demeanor, her calm way of speaking, and her thoughtful actions even made her more desirable. She had a way of making everyone feel heard and important, which only deepened their admiration for her. Adaugo was like a rare gem, and her qualities made her the dream of every man. They kept returning, hopeful and dreaming that just maybe one day, Adaugo would change her mind and see one of them as her true love. Meanwhile, the reason Adaugo kept turning down the offers from the young men of the village wasn't because they weren't good enough. It was because her heart was already given to someone very special. That someone was Azuka, the village fisherman. Azuka was a strikingly handsome young man. He was tall and slim, with a strong build that showed through his simple fisherman's clothes. He moved with the grace of someone who knew the rivers and the seas like the back of his hand. But what really caught everyone's attention was his smile. It was a bright, infectious smile that seemed to light up the whole village. Whenever he smiled, it was almost impossible not to smile back. Azuka was known for his great sense of humor. He loved to tell jokes and funny stories, and he had a knack for making everyone around him burst into laughter. Many of the young girls in the village adored him for his charm and cheerful spirit. Adaugo and Azuka had shared a deep bond since they were young teenagers. Back then, they were just discovering what it felt like to care for someone so deeply. They didn't fully understand their feelings at the time, but they knew that there was something special about the way they felt when they were together. As they grew older, this bond only deepened, turning into a profound love. They adored each other immensely, and their connection was built on a strong foundation of shared memories and mutual respect. This deep affection and understanding between Adaugo and Azuka was why Adaugo could not imagine being with anyone else. Her heart belonged entirely to Azuka, the village fisherman, who had been her companion and greatest support since their youth. As time marched on, suitors continued to come and go, hoping to win Adaugo's heart, but she had eyes only for Azuka. They had been together for over 10 years, a couple since their early teenage days. Despite their long relationship, Azuka had never brought up the topic of marriage. Whenever Adaugo tried to steer the conversation towards their future, Azuka would quickly change the subject or show little interest. Adaugo often shared stories with Azuka about the many suitors who visited, hoping to make him see how desirable she was to others. Azuka was well aware of this, living in the same village and witnessing the steady stream of admirers. Yet, his usual response was that he wasn't ready. He claimed he needed enough money to maintain her beauty and build his future family. He always asked for her patience, reassuring her that he had her best interests at heart. Adaugo believed in Azuka's love and hoped that he truly needed the time to prepare for their life together. However, even after 2 additional years, nothing changed. Azuka repeated the same excuses and continued to ask for more time. This situation began to weigh heavily on Adaugo. She was not getting any younger, and the concern became more pressing when her father spoke to her about it. He observed that Azuka didn't seem like a man who was ready to settle down. "You are a woman," her father advised, "and women walk with time. Look, while you still have suitors, make the right decision so you don't regret it tomorrow." Adaugo felt a mix of sadness and frustration. Her heart was with Azuka, but she couldn't ignore the reality of her situation. The uncertainty of her future with him started to cloud her once happy thoughts. Faced with the need to make a tough decision, Adaugo began to reconsider her choices, wondering if waiting for Azuka was truly the right decision. Her father's words echoed in her mind, urging her to think about her own happiness and future. Adaugo was growing increasingly frustrated with Azuka's constant excuses. She was aware that time was passing by, and her youth wasn't going to last forever. Her father had voiced his concerns too, pointing out that Azuka didn't seem ready to settle down. She made a tough decision within herself. It was time to shift her focus away from Azuka. She resolved to consider other suitors who were ready and willing to settle down and start a family. One sunny afternoon, her father gave her a task that seemed quite ordinary at the time. She was to deliver some yam seedlings to his friend, Mazi Odemba, as it was the planting season. Mazi Odemba had purchased these seedlings to plant on his farm. When Adaugo arrived at Mazi Odemba's home, she discovered that he was still out at his farm. Instead, she was greeted by a very young handsome man who was busy breaking firewood in front of the house. This was the first time she was seeing him, and she couldn't help but notice how handsome he was. The young man greeted her with a warm, inviting smile and spoke to her in such a pleasant manner. After she delivered her father's message, she left, but the encounter stayed in her mind. A few days later, Mazi Odemba visited Adaugo's father, Mazi Ojeli. As they sat down and enjoyed a keg of palm wine, Mazi Odemba brought up the meeting between his son and Adaugo. "My son has not stopped talking about your daughter since she brought those yam seedlings," he said. "I think he likes her." Curious, Mazi Ojeli leaned in. "Eh? Which of your sons?" "It's Nnamdi, the one who sells clothing material in the city." Mazi Ojeli's eyes widened in surprise. Oh, Nnamdi. You didn't tell me he had returned. He must be doing quite well for himself now." "Yes, he is. He's back to find a wife. His business is thriving and he's ready to settle down. He really likes your daughter, and I promised him I would talk to you about it. But of course, Adaugo has the final say." Mazi Ojeli smiled broadly, feeling a mix of excitement and relief. "Odemba, my friend, it seems we might become in-laws soon. I will definitely talk to Adaugo about Nnamdi. He sounds like a good match for her." The two friends laughed and continued their conversation into the evening, enjoying the cool breeze and the palm wine. The possibility of a new and promising relationship for Adaugo seemed to brighten the mood even more. Convincing Adaugo that Nnamdi was a suitable match for her wasn't too difficult. especially after hearing her father describe him as a wealthy and hardworking man. Plus, Adaugo herself couldn't deny that he was quite handsome. With her father's encouragement, she agreed to marry Nnamdi, and her father quickly relayed the news to his friend, Mazi Odemba. Excited, the two families set a date for the marriage right away. Despite agreeing to marry Nnamdi, Adaugo's heart was heavy. Deep down, she still yearned for Azuka, the fisherman she had loved for so long. She had always imagined Azuka would be the one getting married to her. His deep love for her was something she cherished, and as the wedding day approached, her sadness deepened. At night, she often lay in her bed, tears silently streaming down her face as she cried herself to sleep. As the marriage preparations moved forward, everything seemed to be falling perfectly into place, except for Adaugo's heart. She had met with Nnamdi a few times, and he was genuinely nice and kind to her. He treated her and seemed excited about their future together. Adaugo started to think that perhaps marrying Nnamdi was a sensible choice. She hoped that in time, she could let go of her feelings for Azuka and embrace this new chapter in her life with Nnamdi. She tried to convince herself that this was for the best, that maybe with time, her love for Azuka would fade and she would find true happiness with Nnamdi. Azuka's heart sank when he heard from the villagers that Adaugo was getting married. She had been acting differently lately, not visiting him as often, which left him feeling heartbroken and shattered. He always believed that she would wait for him until he was ready to settle down with her. The night before her wedding, driven by a mix of despair and hope, Azuka went to her house. Under the moonlit sky, he called her outside, his voice trembling with emotion. "Please, Ada, don't do this to me. You know how much I love you and I know you love me. Please, don't marry him," he pleaded, tears rolling down his cheeks. Adaugo, with tears brimming in her eyes, replied softly, "I love you, Azuka, but I can't keep waiting. It's been years and I'm not getting younger. I've waited long enough, but you never seem to be ready. Tomorrow is my marriage, and I can't have my father see us here." In desperation, Azuka knelt on the ground, crying and begging her, "Let's run away together. I can't live without you, my Adaugo." Adaugo was thrown into a whirlwind of confusion. Her heart ached for Azuka, but her marriage was just few hours away. Torn between her love and her duty, she finally ran back into her house, leaving Azuka outside. She shut herself in her room and wept profusely, wishing that Azuka had been ready to marry her sooner. She cried until exhaustion took over her and she drifted into a troubled sleep. The next morning, the day of the wedding, her mother, Oyibo, had gathered several village women to help prepare Adaugo. "I want her to be the most beautiful bride this village has ever seen. She is my only daughter," Oyibo declared with a mixture of pride and joy. Adaugo looked absolutely breathtaking in her marriage outfit, transformed by the skilled hands of the women. Yet, underneath the surface, her heart was heavy with sorrow. Images of Azuka, his pleading eyes and the pain in his voice haunted her. Tears rolled down her cheeks, marring her beautiful makeup. Meanwhile, the compound was alive with celebration. Nnamdi, her husband-to-be, and his family were already outside, engaging in the traditional marriage rites. Once the ceremonies were completed, it was time for Adaugo to greet the guests. But when they came to call her, there was a huge problem. Adaugo was nowhere to be found. A frantic search began throughout the entire house, but there was no trace of her. In a twist of fate, Adaugo had eloped, not with Nnamdi, but with Azuka, choosing her heart over her arranged marriage. The village burst with shock as whispers of the realization set in that Adaugo had followed her heart in the most dramatic way. Nonsense! Absolutely nonsense! Mazi Odemba roared in anger as he learned that Adaugo had run away. His voice thundered with frustration. This is complete madness. You promised you would talk to her, and now you've made a fool out of me in front of everyone. I have never faced such humiliation my entire life. Mazi Ojeli sat quietly, his head in his hands, overwhelmed by a mix of pain and shame. He couldn't understand why Adaugo would choose to do this. Hot tears started to well up in his eyes as he pondered over the events. He had talked to her about the marriage. She had seemed to agree willingly, as if she was genuinely interested. Why hadn't she just said no if she felt otherwise? As the reality of the situation sank in, the planned marriage celebration quickly unraveled. The guests who had come to witness a joyous union began to disperse, heading back to their homes with whispers and murmurs of disbelief. The atmosphere was thick with disappointment and embarrassment. It was a significant blow to both Mazi Odemba and Mazi Ojeli. The villagers, always keen on community happenings, would talk about this day for a long time. The failed marriage was not just a personal setback for the families involved. It was a public spectacle that had drawn the attention of the entire village. The shame of this incident weighed heavily on them, knowing their names would be tied to this unforgettable event in the village gossip and tales. Before Azuka left Adaugo's house on the night before her wedding, he whispered a heartfelt promise. He told her that if she ever changed her mind about the marriage and decided to be with him instead, he would be waiting for her by the old tree near the river, a place filled with memories of their childhood together. Carrying those words in her heart, it was to that very tree that Adaugo fled after slipping away from her house, leaving behind the bustling preparations of her traditional marriage ceremony. The weight of her bridal attire couldn't slow down her steps, fueled by the hope of a different future. As she approached the tree, her heart pounded with a mix of fear and excitement. Azuka's eyes lit up with joy. He had been waiting, though a part of him feared she might not come. Seeing Adaugo running towards him confirmed that the love they shared was still strong and true. Azuka's heart soared. He was overwhelmed with happiness, having almost resigned himself to the possibility of losing her forever. With no time to waste, and with hearts full of hope, they ran away together, hand in hand. They headed towards a faraway city, a place where no one knew them, where they could start anew. They embarked on this journey with just the clothes on their backs, leaving behind everything they knew. Familiar places, cherished memories, and even their worried parents. In this bustling city, Azuka and Adaugo began to build a new life together, fueled by their love and desire never to be apart from each other again. Azuka and Adaugo quickly realized that their small stash of money wasn't going to last long. They managed to secure a modest place to stay and had enough to eat for a while. But soon, their funds were completely depleted. Adaugo, skilled at braiding hair, decided to turn her talents into a source of income. She hoped it would be enough just to cover their daily meals. Initially, it was tough. She struggled to find customers, and the days were long and discouraging. However, as people began to notice her exceptional braiding skills, her reputation grew. Before long, she had a steady stream of clients. Adaugo's small hair braiding business started to flourish, and she was able to earn more than enough to support their basic needs. In time, Adaugo became pregnant, and they welcomed a baby boy into their family. Despite this new joy, the burden of providing for them fell solely on Adaugo's shoulder. Azuka, though he seemed to love his family, remained inactive and did not contribute financially. He spent his days at home, sleeping and dreaming of bigger plans that he never seemed to share with Adaugo. Adaugo had often suggested jobs or small businesses that Azuka could start to help relieve some of her stress and support their growing family. Yet, every idea was met with complaints and excuses from Azuka. He claimed the jobs were not suitable for him or that he couldn't see himself doing them, always asserting that he had bigger plans. This pattern continued for years. Each morning, Adaugo would leave their home to hustle in the bustling city streets, braiding hairs and earning what she could, while Azuka stayed behind eating and sleeping. Whenever she voiced her frustration, he would become angry and defensive, feeling insulted by her complaints. Things grew even tougher when Adaugo had their second child. The cost of living in the city was high, and the financial strain was overwhelming for her. As a sole provider, the weight of their circumstances pressed heavily on her shoulder. She began to question her decision to elope with Azuka. His lack of initiative and the difficulties they faced made her wonder if she had made a grave mistake. She remembered how he had never been able to save enough money to marry her in the village, a sign she now saw as an early warning of his laziness and reluctance to take on responsibilities. Every night, as she sat outside their small home, tears would stream down her face. She longed for her parents' forgiveness and wondered if they would ever understand her choices. The dream of a new life with Azuka had turned into a challenging reality, leaving Adaugo to ponder her future and the well-being of her children under the city lights. Life in the city was becoming increasingly hard for Adaugo and Azuka. Day by day, Azuka's dreams seemed more like unattainable fantasies, leaving Adaugo filled with regret. She often caught herself thinking that if she had chosen to marry Nnamdi instead, she wouldn't be suffering like this. One particular evening, Adaugo walked into their small home to find a young woman about her age deep in conversation with Azuka. Surprised by the unfamiliar face, her eyebrows raised in question. "Who is this?" she asked Azuka, quietly pulling him aside to talk without the stranger overhearing. "It's my sister," he initially responded. Then, realizing Adaugo knew all his sisters, he quickly added, "She's from my maternal side, my cousin." Adaugo was puzzled about how this cousin had found their home in such a big city. But she chose not to ask more questions, wary of stirring up an argument with Azuka. However, as days turned into a week, the woman showed no signs of leaving. With 2 children to feed, plus Azuka, and now an extra mouth. Adugo's patience was wearing thin. The burden was too much. She decided to confront Azuka about it, and he assured her that the woman would leave the next day. That night, however, as Adaugo lay in bed pretending to sleep, a fierce argument erupted between Azuka and the woman he called his sister. "You can't just abandon me and your children in the village to enjoy life with another woman in the city. You must be joking, Azuka. And I'm not going anywhere," the woman declared defiantly. "I gave you my savings to start a business, and you just wasted it. I won't let you destroy my life here," Azuka shot back angrily. "If you don't come back to the village with me, Azuka, I will tell Adaugo everything. How you were sleeping with me, got me pregnant twice, paid my bride price and abandoned us and ran away to the city," the woman threatened, her voice breaking with emotion. Adaugo's heart sank. Lying there, she could barely believe what she was hearing. Azuka had another family, another life before her, and he had even married this woman. She thought he was just struggling with laziness, but the truth was far more painful. Azuka was more than lazy. He was very wicked. Overwhelmed and feeling utterly betrayed, she got up from her bed and ran as fast as she could into the night. The streets were empty, silent except for the sound of her footsteps. She found a tree and sat beneath it, tears streaming down her face as she grappled with the magnitude of Azuka's betrayal. Everything suddenly made sense. Why Azuka never discussed marriage seriously with her. She felt trapped, unsure of what next to do. Her heart ached so intensely that she thought it would break into pieces. There, under the tree, she cried until the sky began to lighten with the first hints of dawn. When Adaugo returned home, the quietness was unsettling. Both Azuka and the woman were gone, and the house felt strangely empty without their presence. As one day bled into two, with no sign of Azuka, the painful truth became clear. He had run away with that woman. Adaugo guessed that he was probably too afraid to face her after everything had been revealed. Sitting alone in the silence of her now too big home, Adaugo felt as if she was watching her life crumble into countless irretrievable pieces. She was shocked and heartbroken. How could Azuka, the man she had loved and trusted, hurt her so deeply? It seemed unbelievable that the person she thought she knew could cause such pain. In the days that followed, the stress and heartbreak took a physical toll on Adaugo. She fell ill, becoming so weak that she could barely take care of herself, let alone her young children. Her world, once filled with dreams of a happy family in the city, now seemed bleak and unbearable. As her health deteriorated, Adaugo knew she couldn't continue like this. She made the difficult decision to leave the city and return to her village. She hoped that back home, perhaps she could find healing and the strength to rebuild. Adaugo planned to seek the forgiveness of her parents, whom she had left behind in her pursuit of love with Azuka. It was a humbling thought to return, not triumphant but broken. With Azuka gone and nothing left for her in the city, Adaugo packed the few things she could carry. She looked around the small home that once held so many dreams, now just a shell of broken promises. With a heavy heart, she closed the door behind her, ready to face whatever awaited her in the village, hoping she could mend the pieces of her shattered life. Adaugo was nervous as she approached her childhood home, uncertain of the reception she would receive. Contrary to her fears, however, her parents' reaction surprised her. Initially, they had been furious about the pain and embarrassment she had caused them by running away. But as time passed without any word from her, their anger softened into concern. They had started to worry deeply about her well-being, wondering if she was safe or even alive, since no one in the village had seen her since she left. As Adaugo stepped through the door, her mother, Oyibo, immediately rushed to embrace her. "Look at my daughter," she screamed, tears of relief rolling down her eyes as she sang praises to the gods for safely returning her daughter. Oyibo then turned her attention to the little children clinging to Adaugo's skirts, her presumed grandchildren. Though her heart ached for the troubled paths her daughter had taken, she knew the children were innocent and welcomed them with open arms. Once inside, the air heavy with emotions, Adaugo knelt before her parents, tears streaming down her face. In a voice choked with emotion, she begged for their forgiveness. She confessed how deeply she had wronged them, brought shame upon their name, and even ruined her father's long-standing friendship with Mazi Odemba. Adaugo shared that she had learned harsh lessons through her bitter experiences. As she recounted the ordeals she had endured in the city, her parents listened with growing sadness and empathy. Despite the pain she had caused, it was clear that Adaugo had suffered greatly. Her story touched their hearts, and they realized all she needed now was their love and support to start rebuilding her life. The family shared a poignant moment, filled with tears and healing, as they began to mend the bonds that had been strained but never truly broken. The woman who had come to seek for Azuka in the city was his wife, Nkechi. His life took an unexpected turn when he met her, a young maiden from a neighboring village. He encountered her while on a fishing trip to her village. Nkechi was captivating, and Azuka found himself drawn to her beauty and charm. Despite his commitment to Adaugo, whom he truly loved, Azuka began a secret affair with her. He would sneak away from his own village under various pretenses just to spend time with her. This secret relationship carried on until Nkechi became pregnant. Faced with the consequences of his actions, Azuka was cornered by Nkechi's parents, who insisted that he marry their daughter to uphold her honor and that of their family. With no other options that would allow him to maintain his dignity and that of Nkechi's family, Azuka married her. This marriage placed Azuka in a difficult position, torn between his deep love for Adaugo and his responsibility towards Nkechi. While he considered his relationship with Nkechi a mistake, his actions did not align with his feelings as he continued his relationship with her, and they eventually had 2 children together. Azuka's heart always yearned to be with Adaugo, the woman he truly loved. His repeated lapses and lack of self-control, however, led him to a life he hadn't envisioned, trapped in a marriage with a woman he never intended to be with. When a chance to escape with Adaugo presented itself, he took it without hesitation, fleeing in hopes of starting anew. But the past has a way of catching up, and Nkechi, determined not to be left behind, tracked him down, setting the stage for a confrontation that would disrupt their life once again. Back in the village, the situation was grim for Azuka. Both his parents and Nkechi's were furious with him They harshly reminded him that Nkechi was his lawful wife, and that it was his duty to take full responsibility for his actions. You got her pregnant and persuaded her to stay with her parents until you could prepare a hut for her. But instead of welcoming her into your hut, you fled with your lover. You've wrecked the life of 2 women, Azuka. I'm deeply ashamed of you, Azuka's father scolded him with evident disgust. Azuka felt a crushing sense of shame, too humiliated to even think of facing Adaugo, whom he heard had returned to the village. Overwhelmed by his guilt and the condemnation of his family, he made a decision. He chose to leave everything behind and move to a far-off village with Nkechi and her children, hoping to escape the scandal and start anew. Deep down, he knew he had wronged Adaugo terribly with his selfish actions and harbored a faint hope that she might forgive him someday. The weight of his regrets pressed heavily on him. Life in the new village, however, turned out to be challenging. Azuka resumed his fishing, but luck was not on his side. It seemed as though nature itself was turning against him. The rivers and streams that once teemed with fish was barren, as if refusing to grant him the bounties they once did. Nothing was going right for him. Making matters worse, Nkechi was not the type of partner who would take initiative to help improve their situation. She did not share Azuka's willingness to work and hustle to make ends meet. Instead, she spent her days berating him, hurling insults and curses his way, blaming him for all their misfortunes. The home that should have been a sanctuary became a place of constant strife and misery. Each day was a struggle for Azuka, filled with regret and hardship. He barely made enough, no matter how hard he tried, to feed his family. As time flew by, he became unrecognizable, suffering written all over him. The harsh words of his wife and the relentless bad luck seemed to confirm his fears that he was being punished for his past deeds. Life became so unbearable that Azuka often found himself wishing for an escape, even if it meant death. His heart ached for relief from the relentless guilt and sorrow that plagued his every moment. Adaugo settled back into her village life, continuing her hair-braiding business. On days when she didn't have customers, she helped her aging parents on the farm, tending to the crops and managing the small tasks that had become harder for them over the years. As the years rolled by, Adaugo dedicated herself to her family, pouring her love into her children and caring for her parents. The deep wound left by Azuka's betrayal still ached in her heart, and she wasn't ready to trust anyone enough to start a new relationship. Instead, she channeled all her energy into activities that brought joy and satisfaction to her life, finding solace in the simple pleasures of her daily routines. Despite the pain of the past, Adaugo held onto a small spark of hope. She wished for the day when she could truly forgive Azuka for everything he had done to her. She dreamed of a time when her heart could heal enough to let someone new in, to experience love once again. But for now, she focused on the happiness of her children and the well-being of her parents, finding strength in their love and the peaceful life she had rebuilt in her village. Hey besties, we've come to the end of this story, and thank you for watching this amazing story. I hope you enjoyed it and learned 1 or 2 lessons. I would like you to share your lessons in the comment section so that we all can learn from it. And if you are yet to subscribe, please go now and hit the subscribe button and turn on your notification bell so that you get notified whenever we post new stories. Thank you for your endless and amazing support. and your beautiful comments. They really warm my heart, and I can't express my joy enough. Right now, I have to go, and I'll see you in the next story. Bye!